Let's continue this conversation from the angle or the perspective of rural America and what some of these challenges that we see in the economy that have led to an uneven playing field, how that plays out, particularly for folks who live in smaller towns. Myself, I grew up in Topeka, Kansas, so I've never had the opportunity to live in rural America, but two experiences in my life have kind of shaped my own kind of understanding and appreciation for those parts of our country. And one of those is from my grandma and grandpa, who lived in Pratt, Kansas, in south central part of the state, population of about 6,000. And when I was young, one of the jobs my grandma had was she worked at a local independently owned shoe store. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what's happened to that shoe store since grandma stopped working there. But we know when we look at the data that a lot of these locally owned stores in rural communities that once existed 10, 20 years ago have closed. One stat I saw recently said that between 2010 and 2016, the net change in the number of new business establishments was essentially zero in non-metropolitan or rural communities. So while we've seen, Stacy, you mentioned, some big cities really capturing all the gains and value of the economy, that's where a lot of new business activity is occurring, but it's only occurring increasingly in a few places in the country. And many communities have lost out on something, I believe, when we see locally owned businesses close and they're not able to stay open and they shut their doors. That community has lost something that's valuable. Do you agree with that? And are there other things that we should be thinking about when we think about the loss of locally owned, independent, small businesses?
I think you're absolutely right. There is quite a bit that is lost when we lose local businesses, particularly in rural communities in some respects, because those smaller scale businesses are the anchors of their economic activity. And really, it's a loss of economic capacity, but also so much more. These are, businesses that are really pillars of the community fabric, the sense of belonging, the sense of connection, the sense that this is a place, this is a community that has a degree of agency and a degree of self-determination. We are seeing in some sociological research that communities that lose locally owned businesses also tend to have an erosion of their social networks and their civic activity and participation. I think Brandy's point about the interconnections that exist, the sort of web of economic relationships between the banks and the local businesses, and if you're in a farming region, between farmers and the local businesses, that, when you lose any of those pieces of the web, it erodes all the other ones. And so it can be a sort of a downward snowball effect. And then there's a whole set of civic and social losses that come as well. And we see this in the data about despair in rural communities, and a sense of hopelessness that affects us in so many ways that are not easily measured, but are really, just have an incredible impact on our well-being as people.
And I think in addition to that, I'll just, add that, what impacts rural impacts suburban and urban. And I just think this regionalism idea, or the opportunity or potentially lack thereof because of the shuttering of these small businesses in rural communities, leads to less opportunity for this regional approach to be taken advantage of. And we've also seen since the 2010 census, 50 of our rural counties have lost population. So people are moving out, right? And so with that moving out, obviously businesses have less foot traffic, less opportunity to make profit and to sell their products. And so there's an economic loss significantly as a result of that. There's also a people loss. So, I think for a small community, I'm from one. I grew up in a small town in northeastern North Carolina, a town of 900 people. So very, very small town, no stoplights, only stop signs and cows. And so our main street, I remember all those businesses, and, going back there now, none of them exist anymore at all. This was, your mom and pop, what we would call a sort of a nickel and dime store. They had all the little cute items and toys and trinkets. It was also a pharmacy, right? So, not only for my grandma who's 94, I mean, she's lost definitely a sense of connection to the people that she grew up with, right? These were her friends, these were her neighbors, these are people that she saw on a regular basis. So with the loss of those businesses goes a loss of memory, with those history with the businesses. I think as well as a sense of belongingness as well. So a sense of pride and almost a sense of hope, unfortunately. So we definitely want to be able to turn that around, but I definitely am well aware of sort of what that loss means and what it looks like for a local community.
Wow. Before I came to the Kauffman Foundation, I had the opportunity and privilege to work for a member of Congress. And when he served in the House of Representatives, he represented 69 of the 105 counties in Kansas. It was one of the most rural congressional districts in the country. And he would often say that for many of the communities he represented, economic development was whether you had a grocery store on Main Street or not. He would talk about the importance of the post office as a place where people went, Brandy, to have those connections with their neighbors, to have that sense of community. Are there any things that you're seeing in North Carolina that maybe would be surprising to folks about the kind of entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial energy that, nevertheless, despite the challenges, you're seeing in some places?
People definitely have the, let's pick ourselves back up, dust ourselves off, and let's get back to business type of mentality and mindset. And I love that about my rural communities across North Carolina. And just thinking just based on the data that in North Carolina, businesses with less than 50 employees make up 95% of business entities with more than one employee or proprietor. So these small firms account for 44% of all employment in North Carolina. Most of these firms are in the food, accommodation, retail, and entertainment and recreation sectors. But that's not just it around small businesses. And I think that's where I definitely want to sort of dispel the myth around what defines a small business. So people don't typically think about your private doctor's offices, your family-owned Main Street pharmacy, your small farms, catering companies with mobile food stands, and your healthy food retailers. Back home where I'm from, on Main Street, there's a new healthy food store. So it's really exciting to see this new energy, people coming back home to start businesses that normally they wouldn't have done that. One example is a young man that I went to school with, and he came back home to help his dad on a family farm. They're cotton and soybean farmers. And beyond doing that, he's like, what else can I be doing to really generate income, but also to help people rethink a vision for what can work in rural? And so using the products, cotton, he's selling Christmas ornaments, decorations and wreaths, right there in our hometown, and has online business sales as well from people all across the world. And that was really took a bold vision, right, and risk taking, but also supported the community at the same time. His whole family is involved, like his aunts are in the back room, like putting the wreaths together. So it really is about this entrepreneurial mindset and the spirit, but also having the support and the network behind it as well.